In 1968, the United States came closer to collapse than at any point since the Civil War. Cities were burning. The Vietnam War was spiraling out of control. The president shocked the nation by quitting. Two of America's most powerful leaders were assassinated. Millions believed the system was broken, and some believed the country wouldn't survive. But here's the strange part. This year is barely talked about. There's no big documentary series, no national holiday, no annual warning. It's like a chapter was ripped out of the history books. Tonight, we uncover the year America almost fell apart, and why history quietly moved on. In the late 1960s, America looked powerful from the outside. The Cold War was raging. The economy was strong. The United States was on a direct path to land a man on the moon. But inside the country, something was breaking. Trust in the government was collapsing. Young Americans were turning against the system they were told to believe in. The streets were filling with anger, fear, and confusion. And the year 1968 would push the entire nation to its absolute limit. By January 1968, America had been fighting the Vietnam War for over a decade. More than 30,000 Americans were already dead. Millions at home were starting to ask a simple, powerful question. Why? Then came the Tet Offensive. In a series of coordinated surprise attacks, North Vietnamese forces struck across South Vietnam, completely contradicting everything the American public had been told. The government had promised victory was just around the corner. But the images on television screens showed chaos, defeat, and desperation. For the first time, millions of Americans realized something terrifying. They had been lied to. The credibility gap wasn't just a political term anymore. It was a chasm that had opened up right in their living rooms. As trust collapsed, protest exploded. It felt like the entire country was shouting. College campuses, once seen as quiet places of learning, became battlegrounds. Students clashed with administrators, with each other, and with the law. Police and even National Guard units were deployed against American students on American soil. The images were shocking. Young people, not much older than teenagers, facing down armed soldiers. At the exact same time, racial tensions, which had been simmering for generations, were reaching a breaking point. The civil rights movement had made incredible gains, but the struggle for true equality was far from over. And then, on April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis. The man who had preached nonviolence was struck down by an act of ultimate violence. The nation's moral compass shattered. Within hours, over 100 American cities erupted in fire and rage. Washington, D.C. burned just blocks from the White House. You could see the smoke from the steps of the Capitol building. Federal troops, armed with machine guns, were deployed to guard the very heart of American democracy from its own citizens. This was not a distant war zone being broadcast from thousands of miles away. This was America, at war with itself. The system wasn't just strained. It was visibly losing control. Then came something almost unheard of in modern American politics. On the evening of March 31st, 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson, one of the most powerful and politically savvy presidents in history, went on national television. He was expected to talk about the war, about the path forward. He did. But at the very end of his speech, he dropped a political bombshell that no one saw coming. He would not seek, and would not accept, the nomination of his party for another term as president. Think about that. A sitting U.S. president had effectively admitted defeat. He had lost control of the war, lost the trust of the people, and saw no way to unite a fractured nation. It was a stunning moment. Behind closed doors, officials and advisors were in a state of quiet panic. They feared the country was becoming ungovernable. If the president himself was stepping down because the job was impossible, who could possibly steer the ship of state through this storm? The highest office in the land was, for a moment, vacant of authority. The summer of 1968 was meant to bring some political clarity. The Democratic National Convention in Chicago was supposed to choose a new leader to bring order to the chaos. Instead, it became one of the most infamous disasters in American political history. Thousands of anti-war protesters, civil rights activists, and disillusioned young people flooded the city. The mayor of Chicago responded by turning the city into a fortress. What happened next was broadcast live on national television for the entire world to see. Police responded to the protests with overwhelming, brutal force. News anchors tried to describe the scene as their own journalists were being beaten by police on camera. Protesters chanted, "The whole world is watching," and they were right. Americans sat in their living rooms and watched their own democracy turn violent against itself. For many, this was the moment that shattered the idea that America was a stable, predictable country. The chaos wasn't just in the streets. It was inside the convention hall, inside the political process itself. Just as the nation was reeling from the assassination of Dr. King, tragedy struck again. Robert F. Kennedy, brother of the slain President John F. Kennedy, was running for president. He was a complicated figure, but to millions of Americans, he represented the last best hope to heal the country's deep divisions. He spoke of unity, of bridging the gap between black and white, rich and poor. He seemed to understand the anger and the pain that was tearing the country apart. On June 5, just after winning the crucial California primary, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated in a Los Angeles hotel. Hope vanished overnight. For a nation already traumatized, it was an unbearable blow. Two of the most important leaders of the era, both advocates for change, were gone in the span of just 2 months. A war without a clear end. Cities scarred by riots. A political system in shambles. Some historians believe that if just one more major shock had occurred in 1968, the system itself might not have held. The country was that close to the edge. What very few people know is just how seriously the U.S. government took this threat of collapse. During this time, the U.S. military was quietly preparing for the possibility of a complete breakdown of civil order. These weren't just routine contingency plans. National Guard units were expanded and given new training for riot control. Emergency plans, some dating back to the Cold War, were reviewed and updated, not for a Soviet invasion, but for internal rebellion. Intelligence agencies like the FBI and the CIA began monitoring American citizens more closely than ever before. Groups and individuals who were seen as a threat to national stability were put under surveillance. The fear wasn't an external enemy from across the ocean. The fear was civil war. The fear was that the divisions within the country had become so deep that they could no longer be resolved through politics, only through force. The fact that the government was preparing for this possibility shows just how close to the precipice the nation truly was. So, with all this chaos, why didn't America collapse? How did the system survive? There's no simple answer. It was a combination of factors. There was an element of sheer luck. There was also exhaustion. Protest movements, especially violent ones, can't sustain that level of intensity forever. People get tired. The political system, battered and bruised, eventually began to compromise. Richard Nixon won the presidency on a promise of law and order, which appealed to a public desperate for stability. Over time, the Vietnam War slowly The economy, after a period of instability, stabilized. The nation simply moved forward. But critically, it moved forward without truly healing. Instead of confronting the trauma of 1968, America buried it. It was too painful, too complicated, too contradictory to the national myth of constant progress and unity. The wounds were covered over, but they never really closed. And this brings us to the final, most important question. Why does no one talk about 1968? Why isn't it taught as a major warning in our history classes? Because 1968 doesn't fit the American story we like to tell ourselves. It wasn't a clear victory. It wasn't a simple tale of good versus evil. It had no clean ending. It was a messy, painful, and deeply unsettling warning about how fragile democracy can be. And today, many historians and observers believe the same conditions that led to 1968 are quietly returning. Deep political polarization, widespread distrust in institutions, a feeling that the system is rigged, a sense of endless, unwinnable conflict, both at home and abroad. The question isn't whether America almost collapsed once. The question is whether we learned anything from it. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it always leaves clues. And the year 1968 left more clues than most. The story of that year isn't just about the past. It's a vital lesson for our present and our future. Thanks for watching. If you found this dive into history valuable, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explain the world we live in today. See you next time.